Welcome to the C++ Club of the 1st of August 2019. Trip reports from the Köln meeting are coming in. Botond below posted his account of the meeting. As usual, it's very detailed and fairly long. He has the TLDR section, which means too long, didn't read. And in that section he summarizes the results of the meeting. C++20 is on track. Executors targeting 23, concurrency under development, networking published, but not in C++20. Ranges, coroutines, modules, all in C++20. Contracts pulled from C++20, now targeting C++23. Pattern matching targeting 23, reflection about to be published, reflection version 2 targeting 23, metaclasses early development. He says that the committee have approved the C++20 committee draft, a feature-complete draft of the C++20 standard. The main news in his C++20 section is, of course, removal of contracts. His conclusion is that contracts were pulled from C++20 because the consensus for the current design has disappeared. And the section below talks in more detail about it. He lists other developments. There were some module bug fixes, concepts bug fixes, bug fixes for the spaceship operator. Using enum was introduced, which should simplify transition to scoped enums from non-scoped enums. In library text formatting, including Chrono support, the C++20 synchronization library, making std vector and std string constexpr, stop token and joining thread. JThread is a new kind of thread which, according to RAII principle, joins when destroyed. Concepts were renamed to standard case, which is good. Source location was adopted. That should make macros even less necessary in C++. Standard library header units for C++20 should simplify transition to modules, although it's best to import the entire std library module if possible. So these are like a stopgap measure. He then goes through technical specifications. Reflection TS was approved for publication, and the facilities in the Reflection TS, he says, are not planned to be merged into the IS in their current form. There will be a note later in his report, I think, about a merged version of the reflection proposals, of which there were two, and they were different. But they found a consensus that requires a new language feature. Library Fundamentals version 3 is open for new features. Concurrent CTS version 2, including executors, hazard pointers, read copy update, and fiber context. And the fiber context is the latest formulation of stackful coroutines, or fibers. Networking TS did make C++20 and is targeting C++23, but it depends on executors. Concepts were renamed to standard case. Contracts were easily the most contentious and most heavily discussed topic of the week. There were probably 500 emails, Botond says, on the committee mailing list about them. A prominent source of disagreement is around the possibility for contracts to introduce undefined behavior if we allow compilers to assume their truth, particularly in cases where they are not checked or where control flow is allowed to continue past a contract failure. The status quo design clearly had consensus at the time it was voted in, but since then that consensus had begun to increasingly break down, leading to a slew of contracts-related proposals submitted for the previous meeting and this one. A bunch of proposals that were pretty radical changes were submitted at the last minute, and so there wasn't consensus, and the only consensus was to pull contracts from C++20. The committee formed a new study group. We'll watch their progress and hope that contracts get into 23, but so far, looking at Botond's account of what happened, there isn't much cause for optimism to me. A more detailed account of changes to modules, basically all is well. There were some bug fixes, so everything is on track. Coroutines, some proposals were rejected, including better keywords for coroutines, and they're not really better. They weren't better and they didn't make much sense. On the plus side, look at the bright side. Co-await, co-yield, and co-return are highly searchable and Googleable, which should help their adoption. Comparisons had some bug fixes approved. Now, lightweight exceptions were finally discussed in EUG. Botond thinks that this proposal is particularly important because it aims to heal the current fracture of the C++ user community into those who use exceptions and those who do not. There are some parts of this that are questionable, like what to do in case of allocation failure. And initially the proposal said we should terminate every time, although now it's not going to be that clear-cut, and there might be some other ideas here. The fourth part, he says, is about making the exceptions usage more visible by allowing exceptions that propagate exceptions, expressions that propagate exceptions to be annotated with a try keyword. And that, I think, was rejected. Other new features, expansion statements were modified. For ... became template for. There was some work on pattern matching and some bug and consistency fixes. Compile time programming is a prerequisite for metaclasses that Herb Sater proposed, and they're part of, I think they're part of the reflection work. The tooling is about to release the C++ ecosystem technical report that should include module naming conventions and some build process simplifications or standardization, more or less. That should help those who implement build systems to support modules properly. And the next meeting will be in Belfast, Northern Ireland, the week of November the 4th, 2019. Botond then concludes with highlights, which include the approval of C++20 committee draft, forming a contract study group, approving constexpr dynamic allocation, including constexpr vector and string for C++20, inclusion of modern text formatting facility for C++20, broaching the topic of bringing the no exception segment of C++ users back into the fold, and breaking record attendance levels. There was a CPP cast episode with Botond, Balogh and Tom Honeyman where they discussed the results of kernel meeting, which I encourage you to listen to. Guy Davidson also posted his update, his kernel trip report, including a photo of a portion of a German food that he had, which looks positively enormous. But I know German food is very tasty. Guy Davidson talks about 2D graphics, more 2D graphics, linear algebra, and audio. Audio got some interesting feedback from Apple, and Timur Domler leads development with Guy Somberg providing Windows expertise and additional game development perspective. There's a repository which contains implementation of libstd audio. Not sure the platform support, Windows, and probably I think Timur submitted the macOS implementation. Slide number 3 of 9. Survey results. Your top 5 ISO C++ feature proposals, posted by Herb Sutter on his blog. After the survey he posted 2 weeks ago. There's a link to a 35-page PDF of the full results, but the highlights are reflection, usability, error handling, compile time programming, pattern matching, concurrency, performance, numeric, and systems programming. The top voted individual papers were reflection and meta classes, error handling, static exception handlers, pattern matching, reflection, error handling with STD expected, package management, coroutine keywords, STD process, compile time programming, and then towards the end Unicode, low-level file I/O, compile time data embedding, and text formatting. Herb recognizes that since he posted the poll on his personal blog, this is likely to have bias in favor of his own proposals, and that is, I'm afraid, what happened. The first comment says, indeed the results are incredibly biased in favor of your own proposals and your own interests, and also proposals made recently or which have gone through part of the adoption pipeline. In the Reddit thread for this link, there is a post which is of an explain like I'm 5 kind, and it summarizes the papers that were most voted for. Reflection, compile time querying over type properties. Meta classes are compile time transformation of classes, adding, removing, changing members, capable of replacing heavy preprocessor use or custom build systems like Qt. Error handling, basically something similar to boost outcome, proposed std expected, which holds return type or error information. Now, the bullet point for pattern matching says it's syntax sugar for complex if-else or switches, which is perhaps a simplification too far. It's much more than that. std process, spawning, piping, and capturing output of other processes. Unicode, better Unicode support. I'm really looking forward for any improvements of Unicode support in C++, because just recently I thought of writing a text processing utility in C++ and then thought, what do I do about Unicode and all the file names that may contain Unicode or the content. Other languages have Unicode support built in, but C++ has nothing. Maybe Boost Locale? I don't know. Compile time embedding, there was a proposal called std embed, which would enable you to embed binary data directly in the executable and access it at runtime without any system hacks, but that would require some sort of build system support. There are C++ 20 articles coming in. I have two links. One is called C++ 20 and was posted by Henry Schreiner. He looks at major new features: modules, context per concepts, ranges, coroutines, and formatting, and also some usability features. And the other link is more of an introductory kind about what changes are coming in C++ 20. Some information about concepts, introductory, ranges, string formatting, there's mention of source location, some modules, and then everything else with some links. Slide number 5. As usual, after a committee meeting, some game programmer goes and has a hissy fit. And this time it's no exception. A chap called Glenn Fiedler had a thread posted on Twitter where he says, "Hey C++ standardization committee, stop adding new crap to the language, fix the include file situation, fix slow debug builds, fix the slow compile and link times, and fix the bloated binaries your language produces. No? Too hard? You want to add a spaceship operator, you say." And then he goes on and on about how modern C++ is not what he wants, and how the committee doesn't solve all his problems as a game programmer. And it's just... I saw some more knowledgeable people reply to his rant with a list of things he could do, or the game programmers could do to get their features in the standard, to get what they want by sending people to participate in the C++ standardization committee, because standardization committee is not a commercial entity or a support group that has to implement whatever they need. Someone said, if you want a particular feature implemented, write a proposal, send people to the committee, and get that feature into the standard, which is all fair and good, but it's curious how some game programmers think that there could be a magical new feature in C++ that would solve their problems magically without them doing anything about their code. I get an impression that people like Glenn Fiedler expect a new compiler to appear and suddenly solve all their problems. From what I know, game engine code bases are ancient and people are reluctant to touch them in case they break anything. And game development is highly driven by deadlines. So if you miss a deadline, basically your game loses advertisement budget and whatnot. So deadlines are something you don't miss. Hence, no one dares rewriting or modifying the game engine code that everyone is relying on. And whatever new feature appears in C++ standard, it's not going to automatically help magically turn old code into something new and shiny and get rid of all the problems. So runs like this are just useless. They just show immaturity of game developers like this one. I'm not impressed. Someone gathered feedback on what questions to ask Bjarne Stroustrup. Some questions are fairly insightful and decent, and there are also answers to those questions from other people. I hope we'll read the questions that the author actually asked Bjarne, and maybe some of these questions were incorporated in that. There are some loaded questions like, do you think it's a mistake to bring coroutines into C++20? And some really nice questions that are not questions. Please tell him that he's a scholar and a gentleman. What is Bjarne's stance on adding graphics and audio to the standard? What books he recommends on computer science? There is also this question, what is his opinion about the recent C++ killers? And someone replies, there are no C++ killers yet, and there will not be for a long time. I'm sure that person meant Rust, among other things, and also Zig, if it ever gets released. This is an interesting one. Does he ever foresee uniform function call syntax making it into the standard in any form? Slide number 7. Simplify your code with rocket science, C++20 spaceship operator. This is a post on the Microsoft blog which explains how the C++20 spaceship operator works and how you can simplify your classes, comparison operators by using the spaceship operator instead. There is also a mention of the proposal that allows to rewrite a generate operator equals independently of the spaceship operator. This is for the efficiency purposes. It may be a good idea to also define the equals operator, although it can be defaulted as well. Slide number 8. How do you get the benefits of Rust in C++? This post was about mainly memory safety, and the replies go into the detail on why it's not possible to get the same level of safety as Rust borrow checker in C++. But then you have a set of links to libraries and techniques to make C++ more safe. There is this Safer C++ library, which is a collection of safe data types intended to facilitate memory and data race safe C++ programming. It's intended to be complementary to the core guidelines lifetime checker and includes drop-in replacements for standard vector, std array, and std string, replacements for std string view and std span, drop-in replacements for int size t and bool that ensure against the use of uninitialized values and address the signed-unsigned mismatch issues, data types for safe sharing of objects among concurrently executing threads, and replacements for native pointers references with various flexibility and performance trade-offs. There is a documentation that seems pretty extensive, includes examples of usage. Might be a good library to check out. There is a link to Clang 10 thread safety analysis feature, which is a C++ language extension that warns about potential race conditions in code. The analysis is completely static. There's no runtime overhead. There's an example of usage, which includes annotations like this one, guarded by, and then mutex. The function that requires locking of that variable is annotated by requires with the mutex name in parentheses, which gives you the static analysis that guards against runtime race conditions. There are other macros, attributes that you can use, including guarded by, requires shared, acquire shared, release shared, excludes, and others. Sadly, that's Clang only. There is an obligatory link to Google Sanitizers. There is also a link to the commercial Escher C++ verifier product, and some links related to C++ lifetime profile that include the paper on the C++ core guidelines website, Clang implementation, and support for lifetime profile in Visual Studio 2019 Preview 2. That's all for today, and I'll leave you with this quote by Leslie Lamport. A distributed system is one in which the failure of a computer you didn't even know existed can render your own computer unusable. That's it. Talk to you next time. Bye.